Imagine you are the person who shows up when it costs you something. You rearrange your schedule because a friend is falling apart. You sit with someone in a hospital waiting room, the plastic chair hard under you, the fluorescent light humming overhead, neither of you saying much because there's nothing useful to say. You lend money you weren't sure you could spare. You share something about yourself, something true, something that took years to be able to say out loud, because the relationship felt like a place where that was finally safe. And then one day, without a dramatic scene, without a warning you could have acted on, that same person does something deliberate, something that can't be walked back with an apology or explained away as a bad week. And you're left sitting with a question that is harder than it sounds. Was this always who they were? For a long time, we're taught that the generous answer is to forgive, to assume the best, to give people the benefit of the doubt. And sometimes that's exactly right. But Immanuel Kant argued something that cuts against our instinct to excuse, that moral character is not revealed in what people intend, it's revealed in what they choose when decency actually costs them something. Some acts expose the person who committed them, permanently and without ambiguity. There are specific betrayals that work this way, chosen acts that function less like mistakes and more like confessions. Today, we're going to walk through them, one by one, in order of how deep they reach. And I'll tell you this now, the final one on this list is the one most people never talk about. It's the one that has probably already touched your life, maybe more than once. But we'll get there. If this kind of conversation is what you come here for, subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming next. Let's start with the first one. And I want you to think carefully about whether you've lived through this, because most people have, and most people blame themselves for it. Abandonment during adversity. Not the kind where someone simply drifts away over time, where life gets busy and the distance grows naturally. This is different. This is the person who was present, genuinely, warmly present, through all the good seasons. They knew your name, your plans, your routines. They were at your table when things were going well. And then something shifted. A job fell apart. A health scare landed. Something in your life stopped looking like success and started looking like struggle. And they disappeared, quietly. The messages slowed, then stopped. The invitations dried up. You could feel the shape of their absence before you could name it. Here's what Kant understood about this kind of disappearance, and it's something most people don't want to hear, because it's more uncomfortable than the loss itself. He drew a hard line between people who act out of genuine goodwill and people who act out of convenience. Anyone can be warm when warmth costs nothing. The real question, the one that cuts through all the social performance, is what someone does when staying requires something from them. When a person vanishes the moment you become inconvenient, that is the answer. Not a mystery, not something to decode, an answer. Think of it like a tent peg that only holds in dry ground. Everything looks secure when the weather is good, but the moment the storm arrives, it pulls clean out, and you realize it was never anchored in the first place. The peg didn't fail under pressure. It revealed, under pressure, what it always was. The character revelation here isn't that they left. It's what the leaving reclassifies, every warm moment before it. You weren't valued as a person. You were enjoyed as a situation. And that distinction matters more than the loss itself. But at least abandonment shows you something through silence. The next one speaks, directly, to your face, and still manages to deceive you. The second one involves words. Specifically, a word that was given to you directly, not implied, not suggested, but stated. A commitment. Breaking a commitment without remorse. Think about what it actually takes to trust a promise. You don't just hear the words, you reorganize around them. You turn down something else. You make a plan. You build on the foundation of what someone said they would do, because that's what trust requires. It requires you to act as if their word is solid ground, and then they walk it back. Not because something genuinely collapsed on their end, not a real emergency, not a circumstance that swept the ground from under them, just because it became inconvenient, because a better option appeared, or the cost of keeping their word turned out to be higher than they wanted to pay. That's painful. But the part that cuts deeper is when there's no real remorse. Not guilt that shows in their voice, not any visible weight of knowing they left you standing on ground that wasn't there anymore. Just an explanation, a reframe, a pivot to what makes sense for them now. Kant was uncompromising about this. He argued that making a promise creates a moral obligation, full stop. Not a conditional one, not one that expires when it becomes costly. When someone breaks a commitment without remorse, they're not just failing you in that moment. They're showing you how they've always understood the relationship, as a negotiation, not a bond. The metaphor here is simple, but it holds. Imagine a contract written in erasable ink. The other person watches you build on it, plans, decisions, trust, while knowing that the ink can disappear the moment it suits them. You thought it was stone. They knew it was sand. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice about what you're worth to them. And choices like that, the ones made in full composure, without regret, these are what stay on a person's record, not the apology they may eventually offer. The ease with which they chose to break it in the first place. The next betrayal on this list doesn't target your present. It reaches further than that, into something you haven't built yet. The third one is quieter than the others. And that's exactly what makes it so destructive. Sabotaging someone's dream or ambition. You shared something with this person, not a casual plan, not an idea you floated lightly over coffee. Something real. The version of your future you hadn't fully said out loud yet, because it still felt fragile, still felt like it could be knocked over by the wrong response. And you trusted them with it, because that's what the relationship seemed to be built for. What came back wasn't encouragement. It wasn't even honest skepticism. It was something more surgical than that. Comments dressed up as concern. I just don't want to see you get hurt. I'm being realistic, so you don't have to be. Are you sure you've thought this through? Delivered gently, reasonably, with the face of someone looking out for you. But underneath the tone, the message was clear. Stay small. Stay here. Stay where I can see you. Kant had a specific name for what a person owes another human being in moral terms: respect for their rational autonomy, their right to pursue their own chosen ends. When someone deliberately chips away at your belief in your own future, they aren't being cautious or caring. They are interfering with who you are, still in the process of becoming. And that's a different order of damage than anything we've covered so far. The metaphor that fits here is this. Imagine being handed a map to somewhere you've always wanted to go, and quietly, without drama, without a scene, someone tears out the key pages, in calm. Because they'd rather you stay lost than find your way somewhere they can't follow. That's what this kind of chosen betrayal does. It doesn't wound the relationship. It wounds your future self, the person you were actively working to become. And that wound, Kant would say, takes something from you that no apology can fully give back. Now we move into territory that's harder to see clearly because it wears the face of friendship so convincingly. Sustained hypocrisy. You know this person. They support you in the room where you're standing. They say the right things, use the right tone, hold the right expression. And somewhere across town, in a different room, with a different audience, they perform a completely different version of you. Smaller, weaker, easier to dismiss. And they've been doing it, consistently, for longer than you know. What makes this particular form so corrosive isn't just the disloyalty, it's the effort involved. Maintaining two faces requires memory, consistency, and daily decision-making. Every time they walked into a room and chose which version of you to present, they made that choice deliberately. That's a sustained practice. Kant argued that genuine respect for another person demands honesty, not just when it's easy, but as a baseline moral requirement. The hypocrite doesn't fall short of that standard accidentally. They replace it with something else entirely. A careful calculation about which version of the truth serves them best in which room. Your genuine regard for them becomes part of the infrastructure they depend on. It keeps you close, keeps you trusting, keeps you available. Think of it like a two-way mirror. From your side, you see a reflection that looks like a real relationship, warmth, recognition, shared history. But on the other side of that glass, someone watches you with an entirely different expression. They can see everything. You can see nothing. That's not a personality flaw. That's a structural choice about how to use people. And here's what this kind of moral exposure reveals above anything else. A person capable of this level of performance hasn't failed at loyalty. They've replaced loyalty with strategy, and they renewed that decision, quietly, every single day. What comes next is more intimate still, because the next one doesn't happen behind your back. It happens right in front of you, using something you handed over yourself. What you hand someone in a moment of genuine openness, a fear, a failure, a wound you've been carrying. That's not just information. It's weight, and you gave it to them because holding it alone had become too heavy. Exploiting shared vulnerability. At some point in the relationship, you let the guard down, carefully. You chose this person. You told them something true about yourself, something that cost you something to say. Maybe it was a fear you'd never named out loud before. Maybe it was a failure you hadn't forgiven yourself for yet. You shared it in a moment that felt genuinely safe. And for a while, maybe it was. But then, in an argument, in front of others, in a quiet comment timed to land with maximum precision, they used it. They reached into what you gave them freely and turned it into a weapon. They reached in, found the exact thing, and pulled it out with the calm of someone who had known where it was all along. That kind of act has a very specific quality to it. It requires knowledge, intimate knowledge that only comes from being trusted. And then it requires the decision to use that knowledge against the person who gave it. Both of those things happened, the knowing and the choosing. Kant described this as treating a person as a means rather than an end. Using what someone gave you in vulnerability to serve your own position in a conflict, that's a statement about how you've always understood the other person, as a resource with useful contents. The image that fits is this. Someone gave you a key to their house because they trusted you completely. And you went through every room, quietly, cataloging what was there, not to protect it, but to know which drawer to reach into when the time came. That's not intimacy gone wrong. That's intimacy that was never what it appeared to be. And the next one on this list is slower, harder to catch, and in some ways even more corrosive. Slower, yes, and more patient than anything we've covered so far. Envy disguised as support. This one is the hardest to identify in real time because the person performing it is genuinely present. They show up. They say the right things at the right moments. They call themselves your friend, and in some ways, they believe it. But there's a pattern underneath the warmth that only becomes visible when you start looking at the pattern rather than the individual moments. Every time something genuinely good happened for you, a real win, a step forward, a door opening, something shifted in them, a small coolness, a comment with just enough edge to sting but not enough to call out, an absence at exactly the moment your good news needed witnessing. And then they'd return, warm and present, as if nothing had passed across their face at all. What's happening here is not indifference. Indifference would be easier to live with. This is active resentment wearing the costume of loyalty, and it leaks, slowly, in the direction of the one person it's supposed to be protecting. The image is this. Imagine being watered regularly, genuinely, by someone you trust, and only later discovering that the soil beneath you had been quietly salted. The care was real enough to see, the damage was real enough to feel, but by the time you understood the combination, something had already stopped growing. Kant's moral framework has a word for genuine goodwill toward another person, benevolence, in the fullest sense, actively wanting their flourishing. The envious supporter cannot offer this. They want your company, your presence, your reflected warmth, but not your advancement. Not if it takes you somewhere they haven't been. And they chose that. Every single time they smiled and felt the sting of your good news, they chose how to handle it. They chose the mask. That choice, repeated over time, is its own kind of record. But everything we've discussed so far has one thing in common: someone else doing it to you. What comes next is different, very different. There is one more act we haven't named yet, and this one is different from everything before it. Not because someone did it to you in secret, or disguised it as care, or performed it behind your back. This one was done in full view, out loud, about something that mattered, and you were there when it happened. Deliberate deception about something that shaped your decisions. Not every lie lands with equal weight. Some are told in panic, the door slamming, the voice going up, the desperate impulse to avoid a collision. Those lies are wrong, but they're recognizably human. Frail and frightened, the way people get. What we're talking about here is something else entirely. This is the lie told in composure, calmly. About something you needed to know the truth about. Something that was quietly redirecting your choices, your plans, the way you understood your own situation. And the person telling it wasn't caught off guard. They weren't protecting themselves in a moment of weakness. They looked at what the truth would cost them, weighed it against what it would cost you, and decided you were the one who would carry the loss. That calculation is the thing, the deliberateness behind it. Kant was perhaps the most uncompromising voice in all of philosophy on this particular point. He argued that lying to someone removes their ability to make real choices, because every decision they make from that point forward is built on poisoned ground. You think you're navigating a real map. You don't know the map has been altered. Think of it this way. Someone quietly switched the signs at a junction while you were driving. They watched you take the wrong road with full confidence, moving further away from where you needed to go. And they said nothing, because the destination suited them. That's a chosen betrayal, deliberate and sustained, written into the record of who that person is. And now, we've reached the last one. The one I warned you about at the very beginning. The one no one else could have committed against you. This is the one no one else could have committed. Only you. Self-betrayal. Take a moment with that. Not the betrayal of someone who left when things got hard, or broke a promise without flinching, or quietly salted the ground beneath your feet. Those were acts committed against you by other people. This one is different in the most uncomfortable way possible. You are both the one who commits it and the one who absorbs the damage. How many times have you accepted something you knew was wrong, not because you didn't see it, but because naming it out loud felt like more than you had energy for that day? How many times have you stayed in a room, a friendship, a dynamic, a pattern that was making you smaller month by month and told yourself it wasn't that bad? How many times did you look directly at the evidence of who someone was and choose, deliberately, to look away? Every time that happened, you made a decision about yourself. Just a small, quiet override of your own judgment, and then another, each one a little easier than the last. Kant believed the moral self is not something fixed that you either have or don't. It is built, or it is worn down, through the choices you make repeatedly over time. Every time you silence your own knowledge to keep the peace, you are not just tolerating a situation, you are actively shaping who you are becoming. The image here is water and stone. No single moment of self-betrayal feels decisive. No single compromise looks catastrophic from close up. But one day you look at the shape of who you've become, and the edges are softer than you meant them to be, worn down gradually by your own hand, one small concession at a time. That is the identity wound that sits beneath all the others. Because every time you chose comfort over honesty with yourself, it compounded. And there is something important to say about what that means and what you can actually do with it now. Here is what all 8 of these have in common. The one thread running through every single one, from the person who vanished when the storm hit to the quiet compromises you've been making with yourself. Every one of them was a choice, a deliberate decision made by someone, or by you, in full knowledge of what it would cost the other side. And that is the detail that changes everything, because it means these acts don't just describe what happened in a relationship, they describe who the person is, in the only way that actually counts, under real conditions, with real costs, when decency required something from them, and they decided against it. You don't learn that about someone from how they behave at their best. You learn it from what they choose when no one is holding them to account. So what do you do with that knowledge? Not the knowledge about the people on this list, but the knowledge about yourself. The times you stayed when you knew you should have drawn a line. The times you handed your judgment over to keep the peace. Because that's the place where this whole conversation has been pointing all along. The moment you stop overriding what you already know, something shifts. But the next time someone shows you who they are, you believe them a little faster. And the next time you feel the pull to shrink yourself to fit a room that was never built for the person you're becoming, you hesitation. That hesitation is the beginning of something. The image I keep coming back to is simple. A door you've been standing in front of, hand on the handle, for longer than you needed to. The decision to open it, or to walk away from it entirely, was always yours. Which of these 8 hit closest to home for you? Leave it in the comments, I read them. And if this conversation is the kind you want more of, subscribe and stay close.